Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and what makes you so special and where you're calling from? Like, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Kimberly, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I'm Shelley Kenow, and I'm a child of God, first and foremost. But beyond that, I am a master IEP coach, an author, a veteran special educator of 30 plus years, a person who works with juveniles that have IEPs who happen to also be on probation or under court supervision. I provide professional development. I have my own podcast about special education topics. I think I named them all, but I'm not sure. and I'm in Southern Illinois.
Well said. Tell me about the juveniles. We're going to just dig into the. Do you do elementary school too, or do
I
you do?
do.
Okay, tell me about the
Yeah.
elementary students. How do you as a matrix work with the other people to sit up there and help the children? What is your strategy?
Well, so depending on who I'm working with, the youth, it's in a program that I have in my area called the redeploy program. Those are the ones that are on the court supervision or on probation. But if I'm working with someone younger than that or someone that's not in the redeploy program, I work directly one on one with families, and so they find me through platforms like this one or through my website or my own social media, and we just collaborate together. And sometimes I just do one-on-one coaching with them, and then they feel confident enough to go in on their own to an IEP meeting or to request services for their child. And other times they want me to come to the meetings with them. I do that with them. And because I speak teacher, I mean, as you can, wrong side, as you can see, I I am a teacher. Like I said, I'm a veteran special education teacher, and I understand the language that teachers speak. And so often what I see, what people come in and they're like, oh, the school's not doing this, or oh, the parents are so difficult to work with. It's a communication issue because we're each saying the same words, but we have different intentions in our mind of what those words play out and look like in reality. And I always say when I introduce myself at a meeting that I ask a lot of questions. And that's really what I do is as I like, if we're talking about accommodations or we're talking about goals, or even when we're talking about the present level of the student that needs the individualized education program, which is what IEP stands for, that I just say, well, can you explain that? Well, what does that look like to you? When you say that, what does that mean? Because like I said, we don't always we speak the same language, but we don't always have the same interpretations of that language.
Wow, you hit the nail right on the nose. Like you sat up there and said that. Like, okay, so the IEP. What I have to move on to the next subject. What is the percentile of IEP schools? You don't have to know this, but like, is there like a lower percent? Because you literally have to get the children and the juveniles to start thinking. You have to get them to start thinking instead of impulse type thing. So
Mhm.
what is the percentile of IEP in your state? What is the percentile? Is it a low percentile? Do you need more IEP counselors? How does that work?
Well, I would say we need more across the country, not just in my state. On average, and I don't know specifically Illinois, but across the country, there are 7 million kids that have special education needs that go to our schools. So, like the Master IEP Coach Mentorship Program that I went through, there are several thousand people now that have gone through that mentorship. And there are also thousands of people that have gone through COPA, which is the Council of Parents and Attorney Advocates, I think is what those letters stand for. But we could still use more because there's I don't want to say schools are doing things wrong intentionally, but schools are doing a lot of things that they could be doing better. And I think a lot of it again comes down to that communication piece, but also we have a bad habit, not just in education, but in life in general, of doing things because that's the way the person before us did it, or that's the way we think it should be done, or that's the way the budget is allowing us to do it. Well, the law is very specific, The budget doesn't play into the law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I'm not a lawyer, but I point to the law. And of course, if there wasn't for the law, we wouldn't have special education classes. So that is kind of the foundation of what we need to look at to determine what's appropriate, what's right, and using data and I mean I could talk about the law and how we approach giving someone an IEP or a Section 504, which is a slightly different document, well, very different document, but kind of does similar things. So I think I answered your question. I hope I did.
You did. Seriously. I was like, yeah. Do you think we need to like upgrade the school system a little bit and like have more uh like two things that I would like to say, like more structure in classroom thinking skills. I know we think with math, science, and English, but we don't think with our regular, going to school, maybe even sex education when you move into juveniles, like some juveniles catch HIV early. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I hate to put more things on a teacher's plate because, as I said, I'm a former teacher and I know my plate was already overflowing. I think we need to shift some of what we're doing rather than continue to throw more things onto the plates.
Okay.
And I do think, if we could pay our teachers better, if we could pay our paraprofessionals better, if we could provide them the training that they need and the support that they need, we the phrase right now is, oh, there's a teacher shortage. There's a teacher shortage. No, there's not a teacher shortage. We have thousands and thousands of teachers who have left teaching and are doing other things because they weren't getting provided what they needed while they were teaching. And when I look at the salaries, when I look at how much, say, a doctor who has a similar amount of education to many teachers receives compared to the compensation that a teacher receives, the gap is dramatic. And yet, a doctor sees your child for 10 minutes a year. And we're putting these children in these classrooms every day, 7, 8 hours a day, 180 days a school year. And we're not compensating our teachers for what they're truly doing. And I think we don't have a teacher shortage. I think we have a pay gap, a compensatory gap, and a support gap. And so I don't want to add more things to the teachers. I think we need to shift some things around. Academics are very important, but we have so many kids who cannot self regulate their emotions anymore. And I do think we need to talk about that because families don't know about that. Teachers don't know about that. We have so many kids since the pandemic that have all kinds of behaviors that our teachers are having to deal with, and they don't have the training to manage the behaviors. So we need to provide that training. Again, that goes back to that training and support for our teachers. Teachers are getting hurt way too often. And if they were getting properly trained, some of that, and honestly, I believe the majority of that could be reduced dramatically because behaviors are communication. And if we understood before somebody has a big episode where they stab, punch, hit, throw something at a teacher, then we could reduce that and more teachers would stay in the classroom. I left the classroom because I felt like the Lord was pulling me out. Had He not pulled me out, I would still be there. I loved working with my students. I had students in my districts that were the most severe. Some of that was because of behavior, some of that was academics, some of that was functional ability. But I loved the ones that had the behaviors, the most unwanted behaviors, the most because I became an investigator trying to figure out what
Yeah,
is all of this
yeah.
behavior communicating? How do we provide what this child needs so that they don't have to have these big explosive behaviors? And I'll be honest, I had some kids that I had to pray for because, well, I prayed for all of my students to be honest, but I had some that I specifically was like, these kids have some things happening that it's spiritual, and the only way to take care of it is through prayer.
Understood.
And that was in a public school.
Yeah, that's scary being in a public school,
Mhm.
wow, everything you just said. Wow, 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 wow. Tell me, what do you think it's an environment that it goes like in layers, like it's an environment. They go back home and they get disciplined or not disciplined enough by their parents, and then their parents get mind lazy thinking it's the teachers aren't getting enough pay, and they're complaining about the parents not taking care of the students, and then they are obligated to act a certain way by law to not try to they supposed to work around a student, a bit,
Mhm.
problems, and not sit up there and actually work, like try to push and pull, like that.
Mhm.
How do you Oh my God, how do you feel about the that? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about
I
what?
think our society definitely has put some division between parents and teachers. And that again is where I try to come in and I come in very collaborative. I do think a lot of it is miscommunication. We're saying the same things, but we have different interpretations of what we mean. When we're writing that individualized education program, we write things in there, but then someone else is implementing it, because when you have an IEP meeting, you have a general education teacher and a special education teacher, but an IEP typically covers one full calendar year. So the teacher of the next school year wasn't in the meeting and didn't have that discussion. Or because you have one general education teacher, if you have a student in middle school or high school who's seeing multiple teachers throughout their day, all of those teachers weren't involved in the meeting. And so all they're doing is reading this document that says how they're supposed to work with this kid, but they don't necessarily, again, if it's not clearly stated, they're putting their own interpretation into those words and doing what they think those words mean. And they might be matching, but they might not be matching. And I want you to catch that I said matching, not right, because it's not that someone's interpretation of what they've written down is right or wrong. So it's not a matter of, if a student has a goal to work on fluency, and how they've determined whether or not that child is fluent is the teacher's version. The parent might have a different version. It's not that one version is correct, it's that they need to be on the same page of how it's being assessed so that they can both get the same results, hopefully. And that's
Okay.
where so much of the strife comes from, because a teacher says the child can do something at school, and the parent says, no, they can't. I can never get them to do that at home, or vice versa. And it's because they're saying the same words but having different interpretations. And so there's this trust factor that doesn't exist in so many schools anymore between schools and families, and it's a communication issue. I mean, in the majority of times, it's a communication issue. It's also a funding issue, and so trying
Hey,
to figure out.
tell me about the funding issue.
Yeah, so when the federal law was passed in the 70s, it was
Mhm.
promised that the government would provide an additional 40% of funding to the schools because of the needs of the special education students. The law, as I said, was passed in the 1970s. To this day in 2024, that has never been fully funded. So you have schools who are being mandated to provide services, and they will get in serious trouble if they don't. But you have a government who's never, the highest it's ever been, I think, was maybe 20-ish%. And I think that only happened one time. The rest of the time, it's around like 15% of it is that 40% that's being funded. So if you are feeling like, your school isn't doing what it needs to be doing, talk to your legislators about getting it fully funded. So many of our schools have to operate with lower incomes because they're not getting what they've been promised from our federal and our state governments. So when you asked about the layers before, absolutely. There's not one thing that is going to make everything better. It's going to take a lot of different systems working better together in order to make a better education system for our students.
That could take a couple of decades, if not a
Yes, it
century.
could. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, wow, everything you told me, that's crazy. So it's supposed to be, you said it gets funded 15%, usually up to 20%, but do it supposed to reach 100%?
It's supposed to reach 40%.
Okay, 40%. Okay, that's
Right.
still low. That's still low.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I don't know what the federal government does as far as the regular students in the general education population and how their funding goes, but this was an additional 40% on top of that funding. And they have never closed that 40%. They've never, not one time in uh, almost 50 years.
That is scary, man. Like, how could they do that? Like, let me not even go there. Children are lacking, man. Children are lacking, and they are
Uh-huh.
our futures. It's not going to be many people left if they don't have a proper education, if they don't know how to use their behavior in a better way. You know,
Mhm.
different things. You know, like, how do you feel about where we could be headed, the positives? What can we do, you know, in order to make a better school? Because you're very smart. You know, you have it, you know, like you said, you're God's child. You What can you do? What, like, theoretically speaking, how can we make a better school system? What can be done in physical, like in current form, but theoretically speaking?
I think a lot of it is just acknowledging that none of us knows and or has the right answer.
Okay.
And when we're dealing with students, we're dealing with a population, but we're dealing with individuals. And as you said, these individuals are our future. There is something very scary that happens. It's called the school to prison pipeline. And when that happens, this is what's happening is by the time students are in the third grade, whether they have special education needs or not, if they are behind in reading, they look at the number of students who are below reading expectations and they figure out how many prisons they're going to need in 15 years. And they
No
start building.
way!
Yes.
Oh my God. Is this really fact?
Yeah, you can look it up, school to prison pipeline.
Oh, you're so smart. You okay? You can continue. Go ahead. Oh my God, I didn't know that. So the child that came to clarify, the child that cannot read and having reading problems, they actually group them in a bunch to see how many of them can't read, and they build prisons in the future or in the present based, you know, on how many children
Right.
can read. That's
Right.
predetermined.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's proven correct. I mean, our prisons are still overcrowded. And when you think about that, you ask kind of what we could do hypothetically. We need to get our kids intervention early. If we see that they are struggling, don't wait to see if it gets better. Come in with those interventions as soon as possible, even if that's, at 3, 4, and 5 years old. We need parents to sit down and interact with their children and teach them colors and teach them letters. And not that they're sitting there saying, okay, we're going to sit at the table and we're going to learn A and B and C, but pointing out, like, hey, these little squiggly lines on this page or on that billboard as we're driving by, those are letters, those are words. And having those kinds of conversations with our kids to get them ready to be able to learn when they get to preschool, or if they don't go to preschool, when they get to kindergarten. And so they're able to understand things. I say that, and that's very important, but we also have to understand that if emotionally a child isn't present, they're not going to be able to learn. So when I say emotionally present, I mean, you and I are present in this meeting or in this conversation right now. But if I'm thinking, man, I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, or I don't know, maybe mom's getting, work is really bad, and she's going to have to work late again tonight and she won't be home. I don't know if I'm going to get dinner tonight, or mom and dad are arguing a lot lately and I'm worried that they're going to get divorced, or somebody that I love passed away. I mean, there's so many things that, am I safe to walk home from school? There's just a million things. And so if we aren't providing as a society a good environment for our kids to grow up in, if our parents aren't interacting with their kids, and I don't mean that they're intentionally choosing to ignore their children, but we have so many single parent families now that that parent has to do the job that two people used to do. And that's exhausting.
It
And
is.
so they don't have the energy to put towards helping educate their child.
They
You're
can't do it all. They
right,
can't do it
exactly.
all. No way.
Right. And so, again, there isn't one right answer. I think a lot of it is acknowledging that there are a lot of broken things happening, but that doesn't mean our students, our children have to stay broken. We can work with them exactly where they are, not try to push them above what they're ready to learn, but teach them in a way that they know that they're safe, that they know that school is a place where they are loved, a place where they might get their food that they don't get at any other time. And just acknowledge that as human beings, we're not going to know all the answers. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fail each other because we're humans and we are not perfect. And acknowledge when, you know what, I did promise you that I was going to get you that homework and I forgot to do it. Okay, I forgive you. Provide that grace and say, all right, let's look at how can I help you? Homework, oh my gosh, I could do a whole episode on homework for our little kids and how that is not showing efficacy as much as things like having a family dinner, playing games with your family at night, getting a good night's rest, being able to be away from the screen and just be outside and get the natural effects of nature. There are, but yet we're sending them home sometimes with 4 or 5, 6 hours of homework after they've already spent 6 or 8 hours in a classroom all day long. We don't do that as adults. Teachers do. I think teachers are about the only profession that works all day and then comes home and does more of their job at night. Doctors don't,
Yeah.
engineers don't, mechanics don't, um, IT people don't. I mean, the teachers are really the only one. There might be a few others, but they're basically the only ones. And yet we're trying to push that on our kids. And some of that comes from parents pushing, saying, I want homework because they need their child occupied so they can get the rest that they need, so they can get the house clean, the laundry done, the dishes done, the food on the table, the bills paid, all the things that, again, it used to be two people doing. And and this one's probably as unpopular as some of the other things that I've said, but we need to stop putting kids in every single activity that's available to us. Kids
Wow.
need, kids need to be bored. It helps them learn, it helps them process. Kids need to have chores. It helps them understand that I don't always get to do things that I want to do. I do have to do some things to help run the household, help manage the household. And stop just, well, they got to be in this club and that club and they got to be running here and running there. I mean, there are kids who their entire day is programmed and planned for them from the time they wake up until the time they go to bed. And that makes children feel very out of control because they don't have a say in anything that's happening.
I like that. I like that a lot. They don't, and it bursts their bubble, and
Mhm.
they just ready to do something different. If you
Yep.
give them a choice, and give them some sort of freedoms, and have them think more, they'll be better. Yeah, you're right. Golly. So, where do you see yourself with this whole thing? Helping people. How many people have you helped, by the way? Can you count them?
Uh,
You help thousands,
yeah,
or
it's
hundreds.
between teachers and families, it's thousands at this point. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God. Where do you see yourself going in the future with this?
Um, I hope to just continue to get the message out there. I feel like with my podcast, it's called hashtag no limits. And I talk to people who society has placed limits upon, but who have broken through those limits. And the reason for that is to change that perspective. My book that I wrote is another way that because I want people's perspectives to change, because my perspective had to be changed. When I was growing up, I only wanted to teach general education primary students. And now here I am as an adult, extremely passionate about making sure that our students that are in special education are getting what they should be getting, and helping people to see that Just because someone is different than I am or that they are does not mean that they are less than. And the title of the book is called Those Who Can't Teach, and can't is in quotation marks because the people in my book, it's based on 9 interviews, and every chapter is a different person's story. They were all told by medical people, by family members, by educational people, by neighbors, you can't, you won't, you'll never. And the saying comes from, the rest of the saying is, those who can't teach. There isn't a teacher on the planet that I have ever spoken to that likes that saying. And when I've asked them why don't they like the saying, it's that they feel less than. That saying makes us as educators feel less than every other profession in the world. Well, that's how the people in my book feel. They feel less than. But just like teachers teach all the subjects and all the professions in the world, if we open our hearts and our minds to learn about someone who's different than us, and honestly, Kimberly, it doesn't matter if they're different because they have a disability, because their skin color is different, because they come from a different part of the world, they have a different socioeconomic status, whatever it is. If we are open to learning about other people and their life, they can teach us. And so at the end of each of those 9 chapters, I say the things that I learned from each of those families, either through the interviews or they were all families that I knew before I interviewed them. So other things I might have learned from them through my other way of knowing them.
You
So I
know,
just hope to keep changing the world's perspective and making the world better for all.
why don't you? I mean, I don't want to say why don't you, but have you ever thought about going to speak, somewhere like near the White House, the Congress, or whatever that is, like Congress or House of Representatives about what the children are lacking, so that can show that, because you have all your eggs in a basket, you have all your facts in a row. So that's what I was thinking, because your work isn't finished, and to have a child, you know, you 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 actually get a positive feeling when you see a child that has a disability and they recover from that disability within a year or two. That brightens your day and makes you happy that you were able to change that child just a little bit, even when he goes back into the environment he's in, possibly, or she's in, but you change them for that time. And I appreciate, like, where are you going? Like, did I ask where are you going in the future already?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if
Yep.
you had to give a piece of advice to a person that wanted to sit up there and be in your shoes doing IEPs, like, just helping people, helping severely disabled or severely um, troubled children, what would it be?
Go for it. Find the Master IEP Coach Network. Catherine Witcher is the founder of that. Look for COPA. If you've gone through working with your own child's IEP, reach out to someone else in your neighborhood, because if you're one step further down the road, you can help them. If you are at the same level, same spot in the path as they are, you can collaborate together and figure out, what can we do? Bring awareness, have events in your area. Um, some of the other things that I do that I didn't mention is I do talk to legislators. There's because I know that it's not going to happen. Um, but yeah, talk to your legislators, write letters. The thing is, we have so many laws on the books. Try to understand some of the laws a little bit better. There's so much, as with everything, because of social media, there's so much misinformation out there. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to other people. Do the research yourself, or ask the people. If you're going to listen to me, I'll point to the law sections where I think that information comes from and how I got my information. If you're working with somebody else, if you're working with other teachers and something doesn't set right with you, ask them where they got that information to do it that way, or where they got that belief that that's the way it should be done. And ask those questions, but ask them respectfully and in kindness. And if you receive those questions, don't get defensive. Answer the question and think about it for yourself. Well, let's see. So and so did it. I mean, I could tell you a story of, it's kind of a joke, but well, they did it before me. Well, why did they do it that way? Well, because the person before them did it. Well, why did they do it that way? Because the person before them did it that way. Well, why did they? Well, because they just felt like that was the right way. But there's no basis for doing it that way.
Can I ask you last question? How can the people reach you? I hate to see you go, but I have another show.
Yeah, no, they can reach me on ShelleyKenow.com. That's my website. You can email me. It's Shelley at ShelleyKenow.com. And notice that the name has that extra E before the Y. So a lot of people misspell that. Just type it into Google. And I did that the other day and was like, oh, there's a lot of pages with my name on it out on Google. So you can
Good.
listen to the podcast. I have them out as podcasts. I have them out as live streams. Listen to those, learn different stuff. But yeah, the best way is through email or my website.
Thank you so much. Stay on the line. Thank you all so much for joining my show today. You take care, be safe, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.